Okay, welcome everybody to Spin
Hi.
Legal tonight. In tonight's subject with Angela and myself is garnishment. And we'll talk about garnishment, where it comes from, what the idea is, and what you should know about it. Okay, so if you need to contact Invictus Legal, you can do so on 905-688-5598. Or you can email Angela at angela@weareinvictus.legal, or me at peter@weareinvictus.legal, or you can always go to our website, weareinvictus.legal. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so we're talking about garnishment tonight. I just looked this up just 5 seconds ago. So the remedies of garnishment and attachment are traceable to Roman law, and they were a recognized practice of medieval merchants, and the availability of scope of remedy today depends upon statutory authorization and provisions among various countries that exist. So it's not a common law remedy, it's a statute remedy today.
In civil code.
Interesting, eh? And from the Romans.
Yep.
And probably different than
the Romans do.
When in Rome, do what the Romans do. Yeah.
Yep.
Nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly good legal doctrine, right? Okay. So let's make sure that we are not going to be disturbed. Okay. So my phone's on Do Not Disturb, at least. Okay, so that's the origins. Okay, but garnishment, for those who didn't know, was a legal process for collecting a monetary judgment on behalf of a plaintiff from a defendant. So the garnishment really allows the garnisher or the plaintiff to take money or property from the debtor, being the person or institution that holds the property that represents the debt.
Yep. That allows you to commit legalized theft.
Well, not quite, because it's not theft, because you have the court backing.
Yeah. Well, you owe, okay? So you pay. And it's all
but again, at the end of the day, you don't necessarily, it's not about pay. It's about collecting what is due.
Yeah.
And of course, the old adage there is that, hey, I owe $5,000 to my credit card. When they added interest, legal fees, that was another $7,000. And then they took me to court, and now it's and then when the court decision came up, it was $21,000, and now I owe $33,000 on a $5,000 debt.
Yep, that can happen.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially Money Mart.
No, that's not. Let's not.
Used to collect for Money Mart.
Not slag off potential people there. Okay. Right. So garnishments apply in several key areas. Spousal and child support. You know that you've got to pay child support. Spousal or child support, and formally it's garnished, but people don't think of it that way. But it is garnishment. Debts that you might owe, or decisions from civil claims. So, for example, if you owe credit card debt, that's one form of gone through a civil claim. But the other one is that I won a civil claim on a neighbor dispute between you and me, because your tree fell on my backyard and gave me, thousands of dollars worth of damage. Right. So the judge awarded.
Have to make a judge made decision. Yeah,
the judge made a decision that says you owe me $8,000, and now I'm collecting on it. Give. Right. That's at the end of the day. That's kind of where we are. All right. Any thoughts? Any further thoughts on that?
Well, that's basically what they do. Any kind of taxes owing back, municipal taxes also can be put back onto your like you have property taxes. Municipal taxes, they have a different way of collection.
Yeah.
You lose your property after sale if you don't pay them
Yeah.
for 2
Because
years.
they're the first priority on your mortgage, on your their first claim on your property, which is often why mortgage companies don't let you pay the property tax. They pay the property tax for you.
Mm-hmm.
I always wonder actually whether they make a profit on that deal.
I always wonder too.
Yeah. Because I never seem to, you never seem to get a paper at the end of the day that says what we paid out on your behalf and what we collected from you.
Yeah, that would be interesting,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so a creditor must obtain a court judgment or default to garnish wages legally. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, this is one of the things. Like, we have people who come into the office and they owe money. Somebody owes them money, and it says, "Okay, this one owes me $5,000 for things. Can you get it from them?" Hey, hey, okay.
So what
And
what
we
am I
talk
going to do?
about how these things are done. We usually tell them that we have to go to court. We have to file a claim. They have to get to file a defense, and then we go to a settlement conference, and then we go to court and have a trial, and see if that 5,000 is literally owed. And if the judge decides in your favor, then you can start taking steps to enforce it. Okay? And that's the only
Yeah,
time really you can do it on a normal debt.
yeah, but normally most people want you to send the Medellin cartel around, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's, I guess, informal ways, which are not necessarily legal.
Not legal at all. Medellin cartel is not to be recommended, by the
Right.
way.
So, but
Why
however,
are you
going
paying?
to a court, you win a case, even in a landlord tenant board, and you're a landlord, and you come out of a hearing and your tenant owes you $20,000 or $50,000 or whatever because they haven't paid rent in a year. Okay.
Yeah,
So, this sort of thing, gives you the right to collect a judgment. Okay. There are steps, of course, if you go through a landlord tenant board or through another court and you're trying to seek the debtor, and there's a lot of technical rules around garnishment and how you garnish.
yeah, and that's a lot very interesting because then okay, so how you garnish, you've got to go through actually through the court. There's rules within, and we talk about small claims court, but in superior court, there's rules about garnishment
Yep.
as well.
They have similar rules,
Yeah,
similar paperwork, and steps that you need to take, okay, to
yeah.
enforce a superior court judgment.
So here's your order. Here's your judgment. Now you're in the situation where you're saying to the court, okay, allow me to collect my debt. So they will go through what's called a judgment debtor exam to examine the debtor to see.
That's you don't have to do that, but that's often done if you
Yeah,
don't know what the person owns.
yeah. Oh,
Okay,
I know. You don't have to do that if you
yeah,
know that
but
they.
that is another way of coming up with things.
Oh, yeah,
Okay, but
exactly.
garnishment is when you know that that person banks over there and that they just inherited something from their great grandfather, or you know that they work at General Motors,
Yeah,
and you know where that is, and you know where they live. Then you can garnish.
yeah.
Okay,
I,
so those are things when you have information about the person, about where they get their income from, and you also know a little bit about where they bank or where they have assets.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole question about assets, the bank garnishing a bank account is problematic because, just 5 seconds before the garnishment arrives at the bank account, they withdraw their $200,000
Yep, just like that.
just like that. Big presto, you can't stop them, taking the money, can you?
No.
That's a tough one. That one. So we look often more often people look at other ways to garnish, and as I say, that's when they'll go to a judgment debtor exam in the small claims court. Similar procedures exist in the Superior Court, and essentially the interesting thing is about that is there's a summons issued to a defendant or debtor, and they are supposed to come to the court and bring with them information. And hey, we went last week to a judgment debtor exam, and what happened? The debtor didn't show, did he?
Yeah. So now it's being put forward for a contempt hearing.
Yep. So next
now
time,
let's see what their excuse is. Didn't we see somebody who was there before, and the reason they didn't show is because they were in the hospital? And they went into all their previous records that this happened 4 times before.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so they just happened to go into the hospital every time they have to go to court.
Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting one. So if you're gonna use an excuse as to why you can't get to court, at least be original about it.
Yeah, yeah. Like or you say, like, I used to have that, like, oh, my grandmother died. Okay, then it happens a second time around. Oh, my grandmother died. How many grandmothers do you have?
Well, you got at least 2, right?
Yeah, I got at least 2. But if they come back a third time,
then it's highly questionable. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my step grandmother.
Yeah. So these are things where you have to do that. But however, we're mostly focusing on garnishment.
Yeah.
Okay, and how that is done. So you must get a court order of some sort.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
or sometimes it can happen at a settlement conference where if you decide that you're going to do a settlement, but then the person just decides to skip the settlement and not give them any money, okay, and refuses to pay, and they disappear. So then you can start garnishing, okay, bank accounts, whatever.
Well, in fact, actually, that's when you do a settlement conference normally, and there's an agreement made. Normally, what you do with that is that there is actually a payment process agreed
and
to.
an enforcement clause.
Yeah. An enforcement clause that if you don't pay by said date, you can go back to the court and settle for the total amount minus what you've already paid, of course.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And in fact, actually, the interesting thing about that is, for example, you can get a decision which is $9,000 paid out on chunks of over a period of time at $360 a month. And non-payment will mean that we can go back for the full $12,000.
Yep.
And exactly. Get an order on the 12,000 minus what was.
Where I think it was about 10 or 15,000 we agreed to with monthly payments, and it was originally a $25,000 debt. The person decided not to pay their payments towards a 10 or 15,000, whatever it is. So we went back, put them in default, and we said, okay, and the balance for enforcement purposes was $25,000 plus interest, plus costs, blah, blah, blah. It goes on.
And by the time the plus interest plus costs have accrued at that point, you're probably up at 30,000.
Sometimes even more, depending on how long this was, and how long the person waited, like pre-judgment, post-judgment, everything.
Well, actually, yeah, exactly. And there was one that I was doing for somebody else where the amount was over 50,000.
Mm-hmm. And then you can go there because the costs have added up, and you can still do that in small claims.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that was done through small claims. Okay, so what income can be garnished?
Wages, bank accounts. If you're doing contract work for somebody, like you're a contractor.
So when you say you're a contractor, you're meaning that, hey, the person is actually, they work on a contract basis, or
I'm working for, say, I'm doing some construction work.
Yeah.
And at the present time, for the next 3 months, I'm doing construction for this George Jones. He's building an office, trying to renovate an office place.
Yeah.
Some offices. So I'm going in and doing work with the offices. And for that, I get paid X number of dollars a month. So they can go right up to the person who pays me that, and they can garnish my money.
But again, okay, so let's talk about those in a little while, and come back to that one in a little while. Typically, for in order for spousal or child support, they can garnish as much as 50% of a person's wages, and for civil debts, it's as much as 20% of a wage. Now, if we go back to the contract situation for the moment, I'm saying that, well, I'm working for the city of St. Catharines on a contract basis, and typically I'm pulling in 10,000 a month from the city of St. Catharines, and 3,000 a month from other work that my people might do. So I've got a crew of 2 people. How does that garnishing contracts work in that scenario?
Depends. Like, do you owe the debt in your name or is it in your company's name?
Yeah, that's a fair question, because obviously the answer is going to be, if the company's the debtor, then there's a different answer than if me personally was the debtor. So let's assume for now that I'm the debtor, and that you're collecting for something I owe. How does that impact, for example, my employees and their wages?
If you're the debtor, it doesn't impact your employees' wages, but it impacts on any income you have. Like, as a self-employed and hiring someone else, let's see what's in your personal bank account, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a little more tricky, because if you're a person who owns a corporation, but you're personally sued, it's going to be hard to collect from that corporation. Like, you're not going to garnish your own wages.
Okay. But okay, so now you're coming up against a corporation. You're not actually suing me as a person, but you're suing my company, mycompany.com. Right? And mycompany.com employs 3 people. How do you go about garnishing that?
They don't go after your people because they're not part of the debt. But if you're a company and then you're employing somebody who happens to be a debtor who's being garnished, you have to issue 20 pay, and you have to issue a garnishee statement.
Oh, yeah, I know, but that's when your employee is being garnished. But what if you as a company were being sued? Were the debtor?
It really depends on what is owed to you, whether you got bank accounts, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's happened with clients of mine who are companies.
Yeah, and presumably also that, for example, the debt.
You have to. There's steps in court you have to do to put a stop to that.
Yeah, but presumably, let's say that from whatever income, I'm paying out 6,000 a month for my employees. I presume that would factor in that you can't touch the employees' pay. Yeah,
it depends on how much they're taking and how much you owe. Yeah, they can take whatever.
okay.
If it comes out of your bank, out of some money that's owed to you. I took one guy had, I think, $15,000 owed to him. He was a basement renovator. He got sued, and we enforced it. And we found out he had a person who owed him $15,000. So I brought the person who owed him $15,000 into my office, and they cut me a check for $15,000.
So bye garnishee.
Well, they knew what was happening, because they were saying that when we did our judgment debtor examination.
Yeah.
Hey, and then what I did is I took that, and then I
Yeah.
gave him the receipt and everything, so he knew that. Yeah, and that for his income tax or whatever.
Obviously, that has to come into play, because you're taking. He think because.
And if other people were working on the job with him, he has to find another way to pay them.
Yeah. Okay.
But I had a situation one time where a company was being sued, and the amount was rather small. Like it was about $3,000 or $4,000. The guy was suing for. That was ridiculous. And the company didn't know they were being sued. All they know is that one day they woke up, their whole bank account. They had about like 100 employees. The whole bank account was frozen. Okay. And then they get this thing that they're being sued, and it was like $3,000 or $4,000, and they're freaking out at me. I said, "Well, what you're going to do quickly?" So I acted quickly. We got it set aside and got it put back into court because you cannot do. They have to hold, like if they take money from your company and they put it into court, they have to hold that for 30 days, just in case somebody like me comes around and says stop. Okay. So that's why they do have to do that. So I did that, and then it was turned around, and they were able to do that. We went to court, fought it, and we won. But it was this type of thing can happen, and this was a company's payroll, the payroll account that they use.
Yeah.
I was flipping out, right. Because this is what people do, and unfortunately, this could be very damaging. And I think there's got to be, like, on one hand, there's got to be some protection in places so employees' wages aren't affected, or just to try to keep it so that the company's not effectively going to go out of business.
Yeah.
Okay. Because even in bankruptcy or what they call Division 1 proceedings, they don't force a company out of business as a way of restructuring it.
Well, that actually, because that can be quite painful. For a small debt, you're closing a company down, right?
The guy got a kick out of it too. Like he was like sticking like he was giving me the finger, literally. and he said, "I just gonna do this. I don't like big companies. This is what I do. I am David, big company Goliath."
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the ones I skipped over for now. Spousal and child support of 50%. Now we don't deal with these very often. We don't deal with these at all, actually, in our firm.
This is usually on the family law enforcement court, and there's agreements. They have enforcements.
And most people,
between provinces,
think of these as
some countries.
Most of the people think of these as child or spousal support agreements, but they are technically.
No, but what I mean by agreements, these are enforcement agreements.
Yes.
Like countries sign enforcement agreements, so that I will enforce your debts of people from your country, and you'll enforce mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So these debts are actually, so they're agreements that are decided in the court. And they do act in the form of a garnishment, because in fact the court can go to your employer and demand up to 50% of your wages.
Yep, right? Even EI. See, things like EI and stuff like that, they can take that money too, even though I can't garnish EI for another type of debt.
Well, I was going to say with this one, right? So I'm earning, just for an example, I'm earning $5,000 a month, and they're taking 50%. They decide to take 50% of my wages, but my rent is $2,700 a month.
Yeah, and this makes it very difficult. We'll talk a bit later about what to do if you get stuck in that type of circumstance.
Yeah, so that can be problematic. That's for sure. Okay, so for civil debts and where you've won a particular case, 20% of a person's net wages can be garnished. Now, here the court operates slightly differently, because it's not quite the same as spousal support.
Right.
It says a maximum of 20%. So what they're going to look at is what your rent is, what your mortgage is, one or the other.
Actually, they don't. They go at 20%, but they'll go into what to do about it if it's too much.
Yeah, but they'll look at those sort of things.
Yeah, and I've held those types of hearings. where people sorted that out.
Yeah, exactly. But the whole point is that they can be ordered from the court as a method of getting payment, or basically the first step in that, though, isn't there a step that you got to get a wage statement from the employer?
No, don't have to get anything from the employer. You just serve the
Yeah.
employer, and the employer sends 20% of the income,
Yeah.
the wages to you.
And remember, that's net income, not gross
Mm-hmm.
income.
Yep.
So if a person's on, let's say if a person's on, I don't know, let's per month they get $5,000. If
And
they're
that's a net. If they're getting net $5,000, so that could be $1,000 a month could be taken.
yeah, and also if their pay goes up from, if they're on one of these sliding scales where they get paid according to performance, and one month they're on 5,000, next month they're on 8,000, and the next month they're on 2,000, the 20% goes up.
The employer sends 20%.
Yeah. All right. So that's kind of the other one. The other anomaly in this one is the CRA. The CRA has quite broad garnishment powers. They can snatch everything from your bank account, can't they?
Yep, they could. They can freeze your bank account and take whatever they think you owe them, And I have issues with that because I think there needs to be some due process involved, and there isn't due process.
I was going to
Like
say,
I have to go to court for debts that you owe me, but if you owe CRA, they can just determine, I think you owe $8,000. So we do your tax return for you. Okay, so you owe $8,000, and then they can go after you for that.
Yeah.
I think there has to be some other process in between where they give you a chance and to prove either that you don't owe $8,000 or to work on something.
Well, everything else has gone through. All the other ones we've gone through to date have talked about court decisions or tribunal.
They don't go to court.
Right? With the tax situation, there's no court involved in it. Yet there should be.
There should be
a way to appeal every decision of a taxman.
Yeah, exactly. They need to tell you.
The vast majority will never be reviewed. But and it would be fair that if you had you could go to, like, say, a tax tribunal, and you've got 30 days from the date of your
decision of them telling you that you owe this much. Yeah. Okay, that you can go there and prove that you either don't, or that you're asking for some kind of relief or something like that. They need to have that, and then if they get an order, then you have a chance to, okay, I can pay for this order, but like that, without necessarily getting involved with them taking your bank account.
Yeah.
Like they will usually try to work things out with people, but it becomes a very, very unfortunate thing when they do exercise their broadest of the powers.
Yeah. All right, let's get off the topic of CRA and let's look at other types of garnishment, including monies owed to the debtor.
Yep, and these are things like,
well,
the debtor is a contractor, or the debtor is a landlord. Say the debtor is your landlord, okay, and the landlord owes you $10,000. You, after a judgment debtor examination, you can find out the names of all the tenants they have, where each of these tenants live, and how much money each month they pay for rent. Okay? You can garnish those tenants.
Well, that's an interesting situation there, because let's say that if I add the rent from apartment 1, 2, 5, and 9 together, it amounts to $10,000, which coincidentally happens to be the amount of money that is owed by the landlord. Therefore, I'll garnish these 4 units.
And that is a very powerful incentive to get money from a landlord who is relying on that rent.
Yeah.
Okay. So quite frequently what happens is they'll either call a garnishment hearing and they will go back and say, please don't take rent from my tenants. I will pay you X number of dollars. Okay. And try to work with them. Okay. But It doesn't happen often, but that's a method. Other
Yeah.
things are monies owed to the person or business. A friend of them borrowed $20,000 last year, but the friend owes $20,000 to them and they're about to pay it. Okay, because that friend came into money and they're
Well,
about to pay the $20,000.
I
So
was
you find
thinking,
out through a judgment debtor examination that that friend owes $20,000. So you go up to that friend and says, "Okay, I know you owe Joe $20,000, but Joe owes me $10,000. So you're going to give me 10,000."
well, I was going to say that the kind of Joe is passing the buck on that one in a way, because Joe is reaching into his memory and saying, "Oh, I remember Judy owes me $10,000." And when in front of the judge, you say, "Yeah, but Judy owes me that money," right?
Mhm.
And of course, then somebody like you comes along to Judy and says, "You owe Joe $10,000," but Joe had actually forgiven that money to you. Had almost written it off mentally.
Mhm.
The only reason it was brought up was because, hey, now he's in trouble in the court.
And there's bank accounts.
Yeah,
Certain types of investment might be subject to that, but a lot of them that commonly used aren't.
yeah.
But there are things when
A
the
bank
most
account,
common type
bank,
is money's owed to a business, like say if you're a contractor, and it's like my basement renovator example I gave earlier.
yeah. So I said bank account. I said it's bank accounts, not band accounts, by the way.
Yeah, it's a good idea to spell things correctly.
Yeah. And the other one that's up there is some investments. So, for example, if you've got an RSP, it's safe.
Yeah.
Um, what type of investments are garnishable? Are we talking about? Are we talking about like investment, wealth investment funds, or pension portfolios, or something like that?
Basic funding, basic investments, not really the ones that we're involving. If you're involving life insurance or any kind of investments like in different markets and that sort of thing, like if you're buying mutual funds, that sort of thing, probably not.
So, if I've got a mutual fund, it could be garnished.
But I got a huge savings account. I'm just putting money in. It's a high interest saving account. They can still take money from that.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. So okay, got you. So you've got a one of these accounts, and it's got $10,000 in it, and you think it's safe, but it isn't.
Yeah, so you have to be really careful.
Okay, so we were talking about a garnishment process, the judgment debtor exam. Obviously, a debtor is asked to give an oath before talking about what their debts are. And I'm sure this happens all the time, but what happens if they lie?
Well, you can always ask them to come back and do another examination, take a transcript from the first one, and then raise this with the court and ask them why they said that.
My thinking is that they're saying, oh, I've got an investment account. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's only got $1,000 in it. And when you come to it, you find it's got $250,000 in it.
Well, you ask them to sign over paperwork so that you can get information about it.
Yeah. Can you take from that?
I often have that from CRA, from investment accounts. If they bank with CIBC, for example, hey, give me permission to talk to CIBC in your branch. I want to talk to the branch about your bank accounts.
Yeah. And
if you only have $1,000 in it, fine.
yeah. And again, the problem about something like bank accounts is how money's movable.
Oh yeah, they just move money. They just go online and they can move hundreds, thousands of dollars just like that.
And it's like 15 seconds before the paperwork drops on the bank manager's desk, the money's moved.
Mm-hmm.
And the important thing about that is that if you've got 5 bank accounts with the bank, and you're saying I want it from bank account number 1, and they move it from bank account number 1 to bank account number 2, it has to be that specific.
You can get it from any bank account that's there, but if you move it from, say, CIBC, then to another bank account at TD, but you never told anybody about your TD account, that's what happens.
Yeah. And I suppose the other alternative there is when you don't tell anybody about that bank account in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, because those are usually not mentioned.
Yeah, almost inevitably never are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what can be done to stop a garnishment? I've got one here. The person decides to declare either bankruptcy or insolvency.
You could, yes.
Right.
And that happens. But you also have to think about it, because there's some negatives and drawbacks about declaring bankruptcy and insolvency.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if this is your only debtor or, that sort of thing. It looks really fraudulent.
Or the other one is that you can file a consumer proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, the trouble is, filing a consumer proposal whereby the person, the plaintiff is the only debtor, effectively, the judgment against that person is the only debt that can be made. Essentially, the plaintiff will get their money eventually, but it could end up.
They can actually go there and object to it, okay, because there's always a meeting of creditors.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they can actually object to it being the sole creditor.
Yeah, but again, that can take months.
Mm-hmm. And you feel that they're doing this fraudulently because they're just trying to avoid being targeted, I guess.
Okay, so can severance pay be garnished?
Mm-hmm. Especially if you know someone's just, I got fired from my job, but they didn't get their severance pay yet. Act quickly, get it in there.
Yeah.
You have to be quick with these. Got to be really
there are
quick.
exceptions to garnishment.
You're on old age security, for example, GIS, Guaranteed Income Supplement, Ontario Works, Ontario Disability, different programs like that, and general EI, but EI can be garnished with family responsibility. I mean, these things, it's very, very complicated. Like, depends on what it is, and we can kind of guide you around it.
Yeah. Okay.
Even if the bank account even if the person only gets money from ODSP and the money is in the bank, you cannot go after the bank account.
Yeah.
Because of the source of the income.
Okay, let's talk about retirement income for a moment. Can it be garnished?
Oh yeah, once it's in the bank, as long as it's not OAS or GIS money.
So, in the case, exactly. So your OAS money works out as a percentage of what you get in from your OAS money.
Because the money there that you're getting is often only money people have.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you got a retirement, say from say from your work, and you're getting ready
to work for General Motors or something.
Yeah. Okay. And then that gets put into the bank. Okay. The best part of doing that is just going into the bank and grabbing the money.
Yeah.
Okay. And the retirement money there, even though that's where it came from, you can get it. But if it comes from OAS or that, and that's, I don't know how they know, but they can't garnish that.
Yeah.
Okay. But CPP depends on what you're getting it and where.
I was going to say it's not exactly going to be hard to get my CPP.
Oh yeah,
there's only $90.
How many dollars and cents? Like so many cents, or how much?
Like $92 in my case, but
$92.03.
Yeah, something of that nature. It's ridiculously low. So, so it's not. It's as they say, and not that I smoke. It's not even cigarette money.
Yeah, this is what I mean about people who are self-employed. We can't even get CPP.
Yeah.
But yet we pay everybody else CPP.
Yeah. But anyway, that's another topic entirely. Okay,
exactly.
So there was another one recovery of benefit overpayments. Now, this isn't a garnishment per se, but it's something that we should cover here because of the fact that, for example, your benefits last month, you're on ODSP, you were paid $1,200, and subsequently ODSP or whoever the benefit organization is says, no, sorry, Angela, we overpaid you by $400. That basically means that next month we're only going to pay you $800.
Depends, like they usually just recover it 10 to 20% at a time and they claw it back. Hey, so you get that, hey, for a person who's on benefits. But if they have a overpayment and then they go over to old age and they no longer get ODSP, many times you'll just go after your tax credits or try to make an arrangement for repayment according to your affordability. They're not too bad that way. I've dealt with people who were in that situation. They try to make it as easy as possible for people because they don't want to bankrupt somebody. But they do have to pay it back.
The interesting thing is, we were talking earlier on about, okay, so they take 20% of your wages. That's 20% of your wages, even if 100% of your wages is your living money every month.
Yep. And then what you do with the wages, if you cannot live on it when they take 20% off, you can ask at a garnishment hearing to do this. Okay, we can help you with the garnishment hearing to help you accomplish that. And there's some steps that you have to take in order to make that happen. Yeah. Okay, so maybe they'll only take 10% off or something like that.
That has to be done through the court.
Yeah, it has to be done through the courts and on through an order of the judge because they can't be doing it any differently.
Yeah. Right. Because in fact, actually, your employer is the one who's deciding at that point.
Yeah, and if the employer doesn't pay what they owe in the garnishment, then you can just add that and you start going after the employer. Yes, that can happen.
I was going to say, there's a common trick I've heard of, which is that, hey, Angela Browne works for XYZ Corporation, and I garnish her. So I'm now getting, I'm now getting $202.12 a month from Angela Browne through XYZ Corporation.
Actually, it goes through the court.
Well, and yes, it goes. Yeah,
court pays the Minister of Finance, and it goes through the court. But and then the court sends you a check.
Yeah, the garnisher will get it eventually, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Angela stops working for XYZ Company.
Yep.
She gets a new job with ABC Company, and of course, it takes you a while to figure out who ABC Company is.
Yep. Right. Or you figure out how long it takes to figure out that I'm working for ABC Company.
Yeah.
Especially when that stops, you might have to do another examination. Yeah. Okay? Or hire a private detective to see if they can determine where I work.
Yeah.
Based on my SIN number and other types of things, sometimes they can figure that out. There's certain databases. Equifax might have it, especially if you've been on it for a little while. So there's a number of things where people could find things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but the point about that being that it's possible to chase those sort of things, but the net effect is that you earn, let's say, $1,000. You've got a debt of $25,000. You earn $1,000 in year one. This person skips to another job, and you earn maybe $300 in year two. Then in year three, you might earn another $300 before they skip to another job.
So what are they doing? Just earning enough money to buy a pack of smokes or something?
Well, I've heard of people who are garnishment skippers. That's all.
Oh yeah, there's a few of them. Like a lot of people who are looking after child support, they just keep skipping job to job to job to job.
Especially the child support one, and one particular individual. I said to him he was mad. He gave up a $200,000 job to become a taxi driver.
Yeah. Yep.
I said, So I said, do you think you can get away with that? And he said, yep, I'm getting away with it.
Yep. But do you know what they're doing now with some of these things, especially self-employed cases, okay, where the court can actually impute your income, and then they determine how much you owe based on that. Okay, and that's scary.
So essentially, if the divorce happened and you were on a $200,000 a year job and you gave that $200,000 a year job up and became a taxi driver or a minimum wage worker at McDonald's, they can impute the 200,000 and demand it.
They could do that.
Yeah.
I don't know, but there has to be a damn good reason, a darn good reason why you left that $200,000 a year job.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not like people do this sort of thing, and
Oh, yeah, but we're talking here about
this isn't family law. They can do this sort of thing, and because like spousal support is a little different, because there's certain things that you can deal with spousal support, but child support, especially if you do that and it's child support that you owe back, that becomes a very risky proposition to do that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. Essentially, they will come after it eventually.
Yeah, and they will find you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this particular individual who gave up that massive pay job and became a taxi driver was limiting his liability, I think.
Yeah, there are people who do that, and sometimes they will do that if it's just ordinary debts they owe too. They'll just trying to make just as much as they need to live so they can buy a can of beans each day and have a roof over their head, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's been an interesting discussion in relation to garnishment. Of course, one of the things that could essentially come out of that is that must be other ways that the court's going to allow debtors to collect money.
Or creditors to collect money from debtors.
To collect money, is what I meant.
Yeah. Yeah, there's different ways to do that. That's just one example of a way. There's also writ of seizure, and there's different ways that things can be collected.
So obviously, with a writ of seizure, you can force things like, well, you can take property. For example, if I had a Rolls Royce car, you could take it.
Yep. So you wake up and find your car missing.
Yep.
Okay, and that's been done before. I've done it before, and that was a really interesting thing. Someone goes around and they just get the VIN number, and then they got all that stuff. They come back to me, like nobody even notices because they just go click with their phone, and they show up, and I have all of that stuff, and then we go down to the ministry, and there goes the car. And it's a lot of steps that are involved. A lot of steps involved in seizing a vehicle, or even seizing a real property.
That was the other
You can
one.
do that over $5,000 or $10,000 debt, but most people don't because it's generally very expensive and not worth it. But if it's a lot more, they generally what they do is they put a writ of seizure on the property, where, say, for instance, a person goes for refinancing, or they go for a mortgage, or something like that on the property, any kind of financing. And then what happens is that writ that's on the property has to be taken care of to be discharged before any further financing can be considered, or even the sale of the house.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff has to be considered. So that's generally what a lot of people do. And then they just leave that. And you have to renew that every 6 years.
But again, if there's so you have to renew it every 6 years. But for example, typically in Canada, you're replacing your mortgage every 5 years, and most people who own property are replacing their mortgage every 5 years. So statistically, you're likely at a point when you put a writ of sale or seizure up, you're going to be 2.5 years to get your money.
Yeah, like I got a 3-year with the blended mortgage package. So It's kind of a weird thing, but what happens is you just put because the thing is right now, because like your mortgage is usually your first secured, your first in line, if the person already has a mortgage on their
Yeah.
property, okay? But when you're going to get a new mortgage, you're getting it restructured, or you're selling your house or something, but there's another little writ on the property from a debt that you collected, and that's just
Yeah.
from
But
a small
again,
claims court.
if
That
you're
has
just
to be cleared before anything further can be done.
yeah, so if you're renewing it every 5 years, right, you have to actually bundle that in.
Yep, you bundle it in and you contact the solicitor or the paralegal who is responsible for creating that little writ, and then get it paid.
Yeah.
Right?
And
And sometimes that's probably better than, because it's guaranteed, it's sitting there. Okay.
yeah,
And sooner or later, people are going to have to sell out, or they're going to have to remortgage. You're going to have to do something with that property. Okay. The only time you might have problems is if somebody has no mortgage and they're debt free on the property.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
If they've got no mortgage and
Yeah.
you're debt free on the property, you have to keep renewing that every 6 years.
Yep. Then you have to
Whereas
keep
if there's a
doing it.
mortgage on it,
And
you're
at
going to
some
get
point, if it gets more and it keeps collecting interest too, as you go, and at some point it might be worth it. Say, oh, let's see if what we can sell that house for in the market, But even if you did, say if it goes up to 50,000 because you went that far and it collected that much, and you managed to do that, then plus all costs and everything, it goes up to say $75,000. Okay,
yeah, but
and
with
it
a
goes to the market and it sells, you get your $75,000, but the rest of the money for the property goes back to the debtor.
yeah, I was going to say, but if the house, if the house is only worth $250,000 and you've got a 75,000 owing, is it worth forcing the sale?
Yeah, you have to consider that,
Yeah.
the viability of doing that, and a whole bunch of things you have to consider.
Because if you force the sale, and let's say that that everybody finds out, of course, that that's 75,000 owing, you might end up with a situation whereby whoever's the buyer only offers, say, let's say 80,000, and because a certain amount of that goes back to lawyers, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
it
you,
does. They allow for all of that when it goes through the power of sale process.
yeah,
Okay, all these lawyer fees and everything.
yeah,
Okay, they allow all that stuff.
yeah,
Okay, there's a procedure you have to go through, and it's very complicated to discuss on here because it's you have to take several steps for it.
yeah. Of course.
One
All
guy
right.
did that over $10,000 on a person's house that I know.
Yeah,
I just don't understand. I couldn't understand both the arbitrariness. It's just that he had the gall to do that for a $10,000 debt on this one person's house. And at that time, his house was worth 250, 300,000. Hey, that was like early 2000s when we actually had 250, $300,000 homes.
yeah,
But this was, I just thought that this was awful, what they did. But he was able to get back when they resold his home and he got the money back, and he just he was able to buy another house, because at that time, he was able just to move it over and get another mortgage and whatever. Okay, but this is what happens. Okay,
yeah,
but nowadays, I don't know how people would think, because there's always considerations when you're thinking about what enforcement method you use.
yeah. All right.
And then the person at the other end always has an instrument or a right to fight it in various avenues.
Yeah, but the right to fight still, and for example, you're at a situation like a judgment debtor exam. You've got a judgment against the individual, and say you've got a judgment against me. Me saying to you, yeah, but I don't owe the 35,000 that you claimed against me. And it was not my debt; it was Mary's debt.
Yeah, but your chance to do that was when the claim was first served on you.
Exactly.
And then you can do a third party and you third party Mary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the point about it, is that if you are a defendant in a case, don't let the thing be found against you when you could have,
When you get court papers,
yeah,
respond to them,
yeah,
send it back, and file with the court. Make sure you have that, just to make sure that you have your defense in, and also show up at court when you're asked to.
yeah, exactly.
You know,
Okay.
you can avoid that whole situation. And then if something happens, because sometimes people just don't serve papers, but say they do, and then you discover your vehicle gone, and then you notice paperwork with the court file number on it. It happens because some people like to cut corners,
Yeah.
and it's been done. And that totally disgusts me.
There's
If you want
actually
to get
another.
into the suing game, do it properly.
There's another thing about this one, of course. We talked about judgment debtor exam. On the first occasion, if you don't show up, they'll book a second occasion. On the second occasion, if you don't show up, the police can come around with handcuffs.
Yeah, they can knock on your door, and you go there, and yeah, I know somebody had that, and they said they weren't served, but I bet you they were. Right?
Oh,
They just
well,
didn't
actually,
bother.
the
They
court,
put it in the drawer, they forgot all about it.
yeah, the court is very particular about
They
service on
want
those.
personal service.
Yeah, it has to be personal
Got to
service.
see eyeball to eyeball to the debtor.
Yeah,
That's why
exactly.
you need to invest in a process server.
Yeah, because the process server is going to be saying, "Hello, are you Angela Browne?" And at that point, Angela has to answer, "Yes, I am." You
Or I'll say, oh, my name is Gene Jones. Hi.
yeah.
Angela Brown doesn't live here.
Well,
That's often what people do.
oh, I get it. I get it.
And to me, I mean, people are doing that stuff. And unfortunately, sometimes they do get away with it. Sometimes they don't.
Mm.
Okay. But usually going around a second time, you find out that, yes, indeed,
Well,
that person is there.
I was actually thinking about this one. Are you Angela Browne? No, I'm not. I'm Judy Jones. Well, it's funny how this car has a number plate XYZ123. That one's registered to Angela Jones, Angela Browne. Is that you? Is that your car? Yes, it is. Oh,
That was interesting. Like I had a person whose previous address was 123 or 45th Lane or something like that, and their birth date was December 1st, 1962. That sort of thing. And they had a name like Gene Jones or Gene Smith, whatever. And then you go out and you use a skip tracer and go and find it. And using the birth date, using the previous address, you find the Gene Jones at the new address. But she says, I'm not the one you're looking for.
actually, that's probably even better if it happens to be a more unusual name like Abdul Qureshi,
Oh, yes. And you're not Abdul Qureshi.
and it's the only Abdul Qureshi in 300 miles
Yep. Hmm.
or in the province.
Or it's in a 500, it's a population of 500 in this town. And there's only one Abdul Qureshi.
Yes. Whereas when you got somebody like Jack Jones or John Smith, there's a chance that there's more than one,
Yeah.
even in a small neighborhood.
Yeah. So this is all very interesting because we've seen it all. But the best thing to do is accept it, go to court, file your defense, go to court,
And object in
and
court.
object, to whatever allegations.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that what they have they're going to prove against you. Just object to whatever allegations they have. Hey, hire somebody to help you out. Hey, and we're always glad to help people out, and that's what we need to do. Okay.
Yep. Okay. And all right. So I think we're there. And thank you everybody for being here and listening to today. And if you need legal advice, you can contact Invictus Legal on 905-688-5598 or call Angela at weareinvictus.legal or myself at peter@weareinvictus.legal or our website, which is weareinvictus.legal. Okay, and then we'll go to the wrap up on Angela's part of the show, favorite part of the show.
Yeah. So what you heard today on Spin Legal, whether on this show or others in the series, is not legal advice. So if you need legal advice, then please contact a paralegal or a lawyer. We hope that you would call us or write to us and talk to us about your situation, and then we'd be very happy to to um, to talk to you. But just make sure. And even if you hear something on the show, it says just sounds just like my situation. It doesn't necessarily mean it applies. Everybody's situation is different. Okay, we want to make sure that we're giving you advice tailored to your situation and taking steps to protect you. Thank you
Yeah.
for coming to our show.
All right. And have a great week. And we'll be back here next Wednesday.